So, since we are on the topic of how you do stuff in games, um, how much? So you did research for Herald,
Yes.
right? So what kind of research was?
We did different things. I went into history books, like just reading history and what it was about, and how certain topics that we wanted to use in Herald related to what the consequences are for our society today. Because we really wanted to place it in history, but it has to tell something about how we function today. And so I went through the history books, but I also read a lot of novels, how a lot of other authors and people who make stories treated this period of time. Like I already told you, I read Max Havelaar by Milton Tully, and I read Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, and I also read The Siege of Krishnapur by J.G. Farrell. And those books inspired me to look in very specific areas on how can you tell a story about these issues with characters and make it humane and about humans and how they interact with their world at that time. But the most inspiring thing, I think, were my personal interviews that we had with friends, but also with people we didn't know or learned from other people that live in between worlds. For example, I spoke to a game designer from South Africa who told me about how it is to live in post-apartheid South Africa for a white man, because he's white. I also spoke with someone who was a refugee from the Iraq War, who fled the war because he himself is gay and had to deal with adjusting to Dutch society and being part of the Netherlands while still being a refugee from Iraq. And I was also part in one of the salons by Sunny Bergman, which was a research session for the documentary Als Zo Zwart Als Roet, about the Black Pete discussion.
Yeah.
So what would you do you think that more research into like discussing with historians or with archaeologists about these topics would be more would give something to the game, or would it remove something from the storytelling aspect?
Which game? Our game or
any game?
Any game. Yeah, I think it's very very important that the game designers do that. And I think a game by Sid Meier's Of Centauri is slightly better than this game, I think, in my opinion. But why I bring it up is it has a lot of philosophy and theories in it about philosophy, about humanism, about the future and stuff. And it's really interesting in how deep that game is in bringing up the numerous ways you can order a society. And in that game, each faction represents a different outlook on what's important in life, basically. So you have like the people who are for planet, this is the planet where they go, and they're like for the nature and all that. And you have like the business guys who are all pro business and making credits or whatever. And you have like totalitarian, it's a Chinese communist inspired group. And I think that's just it's really interesting that a game can explore those issues even when it's a 4X game. So I think that's something that these games do much better than certain other games. They just want to be a fun game. I think it's really cool and important that they do explore these issues.
I think it's what is important, and why I like to work, but why I think working with historians and archaeologists can be something that is of value of a game, is because mostly historians and archaeologists look at history as this happened, but also in a historical context, because they can find how it was for humans to live in that time. And I think that is most important. I can look in history books and read the facts, but I also want someone's view on how these facts actually related to the emotions and the feelings of people. And when I talk to historians about history and about things that relate to Herald, they have all of their own opinions of how this might have influenced. They all have their theories, but it's those theories that are most interesting, because it's when you make a story-driven video game, especially for Herald, it's not so much about how all the events actually happened, but more about how the people that were present at the time responded to them and what it meant for being human in the 19th century, for example. And that's different from colonization, because that's more about the mechanics and stuff and more about how the systems work.
And that also might be why these kind of mechanics are more of a top-down, because even like 30 or 40 or 50 years back, when someone would read a history book, it was also more about the facts and the fights. Or
I mean, that's one of the things. If you look at, say, the history of history as a discipline, there's this period in which it's all about the big narratives, the main events, the important people, the kings, the dates of birth, like when was this kingdom set up, like these big narratives. And then later historians started looking at these more neglected parts of society and other aspects of history, like not the big narratives, but the smaller narratives and the personal narratives and the social, the economic, like all these various things. And I think that's something that's not yet really reflected in this game, which is sort of a big narrative of this overall colonization of a continent. But it's interesting because one of the sort of feedbacks that this game gets, or maybe almost a negative feedback, is that ultimately in the end it sort of ends up being like this resource management game. Like it's almost divorced from actuality, because you end up spending a lot of time in this colony pain and in the city and sort of like trading things.
Well, it is interesting though, because I have to say, I had the same thing. I also really wanted to remain friends with people that are living there already. And I don't know that just me. I mean, I had plenty of friends who also were very eager to also just wipe all of them out. But there is this sort of thing, and actually it's interesting that because actually all those different tribes have their own characteristics, not only in how they are portrayed, but also how they behave in game. So the Inca, they won't attack you just by themselves. They really need some provocation. And then there's other people, for example, like the Arawak, who in the beginning are very peaceful, but after their first sort of encounter with you, violent encounter, they won't forgive and forget. They will just go for the throat from then on. So there's lots of things that are also in terms of the strategy of the game that is really, at least as sort of the big historical narrative about these people has been taking place. The Iroquois, they're almost impossible to offend, right? And that's traditionally also known as very difficult for them to. They were always aiming for peace in those in the 16th or 17th century. So those things are in there. So it is interesting, and actually I learned quite a bit from the game through that about these people when I was first starting studying. These were new names for me. I actually, the Iroquois, I've heard. Oh, they had the League of Nations thing. That's because they were always trying to be very peaceful in colonization.
So this leads us to the question of sort of the educational value of games, because I mean, especially now with, for instance, the Assassin's Creed series, like the more you have countless memes of people or conversations of people who say like, everything I write in my history essays I've learned from Assassin's Creed and so on, But then the question is, what do you learn from a game like this? Like, what does this game teach you? If you were a child back in 1994, as you were, and you played this game, like, what kind of values do you end up picking up?
Yeah, that is, definitely not any sort of cultural sensitivity. That's definitely not what you're picking up from this. Resource management, sure.
But you
economy becomes a thing for you, but
you might learn some names and you'd be like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I'll just Google it.
I think
but that wasn't back in the day. You couldn't Google it, but you could use you could use a history book and see what the person did.
Yeah, definitely all the names in the house. What's it called? The Continental Congress. Yeah, that's definitely something that I've now know these names from the game, then I see them in a history book or learn them in school or whatever, and then I already have a connection. So it's more interesting for me at school. It's more interesting to read about them because I've seen them in a game, and I think that's something that these people who are talking about Assassin's Creed are also experiencing. They're like, oh, I know this. This is from something I enjoy. And it's more fun.
So basically, school education becomes more effective because things are recognized.
Yeah, I think that might certainly be the case.
But then in that kind of approach, you kind of devalue the value of the game, because the game is just like giving.
Well, the game is not a history lesson in itself.
No, but it's not a history lesson, but it's when it comes to moral values or cultural sensitivity, then it can actually be even better than a book, because you experience the thing.
Yeah, I think so too.
I mean, that's why I found this hypothetical idea so interesting of how would people feel if they had this triangular trade and you had to put slaves into your cargo hold. Like, how would that make you feel as a participant? Because unlike with other sources of education, being in a game, you're an actor, right? You can feel different emotions. You can get to a point where you feel guilty for the things that you're doing. So I think that's also something that is interesting that games can explore, right? Is this
they can explore, and here you really the guilt really has to arise from the player itself. Because I'll tell you, I do feel guilty when you're burning, even when I was a teenager, when you're burning a Tupi camp or the Inca capital to the ground. But that's really sort of your own kind of thing. You know, the game doesn't tell you to feel guilty about it. It even sort of doesn't really. Yeah, it's not very graphic. The one thing is, it's not very graphic, so they're not actively pressing you into it.
Do we want to spend some 10 minutes wrapping up? Maybe check if there's any questions from the audience?
Let's do that, because it's almost 7, so we're almost at the 2 hours mark.
Alright.
You can keep playing if you want. I know you're completely hooked.
Man, it's your honor. Let me, I don't know if I can find an interesting scene, so maybe we want to turn it back to
you can put up the Kickstarter, right?
Yes, I would.
Yes.
That's what I was.
But yeah, I think in terms of educational value of games, to me, there's also
I didn't do very well.
just a random fly.
Dr. Random.
Yeah, so I think entertainment, games, movies are a layer of communication to get certain information from science or other fields into the public conscious. I always like Jurassic Park as an example, because Jurassic Park was up-to-date dinosaurs for the masses. And it was a huge draw for going to see Jurassic Park, because dinosaurs, how they actually looked. Now the new Jurassic Park is not doing that. They're sticking with dinosaurs from the first Jurassic Park.
No feathers, no nothing.
No feathers.
It's going to be a glorified monster movie, basically.
Yeah. And I think...
And there was also an interesting lesson in Jurassic Park about DNA and
definitely. So I think with Herald we're also trying to do that a bit. We're creating entertainment, but we want to talk about stuff, and that was the way it was and the way it is now, where these ideas came from, where the multicultural society came from, and we want to do that in an entertaining way, but also in a challenging way.
Well, Herald for me is also a bit the answer to more diversity in games, because instead of just go on the internet and talk about it, and it's our answer to this subject, and we wanted to make a game about it, because it's a lot. I think it's a much better medium to discuss these kind of issues than an internet forum, which just turns into a flame war anyway.
Yeah,
So
that is true.
So it doesn't have to be perfectly true or even perfectly accurate everywhere,
No.
but it does have to give an introduction and pique people's interest and communicate key
Of
ideas.
course, the whole format in which it's delivered is interactive narrative, which is of course very interesting because of course that is in the end what the multicultural society is as well. It's built up of people. It's not groups of ethnicities or. It's really all those personal encounters and we all probably know the story of I've got I don't really like Moroccans, but my Moroccan neighbor is quite alright.
Yeah.
Right? So this is really what you're going for with this. I think you're really personalizing that and going through that, and then even putting you in the boots of that. I think that's really a brave move.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I wonder if you guys have done sort of pilot studies just observing how people react when they play the game and how people engage with it and respond to it.
We've seen some people do streaming the game as they're playing it. So that's really fun and interesting for us. Of course, we've been watching what people played when we go to a festival or whatever. We show the game. Then we're really paying attention to how they're playing it and what their reactions are because both from just we want the game to work properly and see if they get stuck anywhere, but also are dramatic choices working? And one of our goals was definitely to have people when you're confronted with a narrative choice about alright, what am I going to say to this guy? We definitely our aim is to make people think, alright, what are the consequences for him, for me, for the world, or what comes into play into this decision. And we actually see live streamers because they like to talk about what they're thinking. They're already used to that, and we see them and they're like, oh yeah, but in that time it would have been like this, and so like, yes, it's working.
It works. That is good.
So that's really cool.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to see that Devon. It's always you have to make a decision on a spectrum. Devon is you. You can use Devon as a conduit for making decisions, but not everything is possible.
Yeah.
You can only do as much as Devon could do in this situation, right? So that's the interesting thing. Like, what could Devon do? What options does he have? So from seeing that he doesn't have certain options, you also learn something that hey, I might have had that option, but he doesn't. And how does that come into play in our society as well?
It's a very good slogan. What could Devon do? Very nice. He's playing it. What could he do?
So I wonder if we tried to summarize the essential change that has happened in these 20 years, in this 20-year jump.
That's hard to summarize. just contrasting, I think of course like the push for really personality of games that in a narrative, meaningful narrative, interactive way. I think that's one of the big things, of course. And then if you're going to move towards I think really that what you can see is that post-colonialism in the early 90s it was there, but it was really a thing of academia. I don't think it was something that you could peddle to the masses, as it were, right? And now it is really, lots of work still needs to be done, but it's at least something that you could even entertain of putting into a game. I think that's really one of those big changes that you could see in those 20 years, right? That's really, and of course it needs to be done. It's not something that you can just lay back and it will happen. But that's why the Kickstarter is there as well, right? So make it happen, people.
Make it happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Please help us pedal.
Oh yeah, please help them all pedal. I mean, I know I am. We all are, and hopefully some people will chip in. Now they've seen this, we're putting this up on YouTube soon, I think as well. So hopefully you'll reach that mark more quickly.
Yeah, we should be putting it up tomorrow.
Yeah.
Alright, great.
Any final thoughts?
Well, what I have learned during the creation of Herald is that I played a lot of historical related games, and most of them tell a story about the past, and Herald is a story about the present set in the past.
Yeah.
And that's something I really want to give to the audience. It's something that you should also see as something you could use in your own life and not just something that happened a long while ago.
Not in the form of education, but of real engagement with
Yeah.
those games. Yes.
And I think that's one of those changes also that we can see in those 20 years, the real agency that you have as a player to make choices. That like the choices are becoming more complex in games. It's not always like, oh, there's this one right, easy choice and the others you don't even have to read or think about because it's clear. But it's becoming more difficult, more morally difficult, more, complex to decide where the game goes because games can now be that complex, whereas it wasn't always the case in the past, of course. So there's just more agency for the player, which is something that developers can work with
and are working with.
Yes.
That's a nice point to wrap it up.
All right.
Thanks everybody who has been chipping in, who has been joining in.
Yeah, thank you, and support Herald.
Yes, please do. And let's hope we will play more of this interesting game in a couple of years, probably. I don't know yet.
Well, the first part will be released next year, February.
Okay. Well, that's soon. That's soon. That's something I can sort of oversee and work for. All right, thanks all people.
Thank you all for watching.
All right, thanks. And to new streaming the past should be coming to you. I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 weeks. Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. All right.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.